So a few days ago, I was sitting around a bookstore looking at books, and I saw one with a lovely title. It was called, "I'm Right and You're an Idiot." And if only I'd seen that a little earlier, I could have incorporated that phrase into the title of my talk, because that's so much what I am concerned with here, right? So much of our rhetoric, especially our political rhetoric, now takes the form of, I'm completely right about everything. Anybody who disagrees with me is an idiot. And I don't think that form of rhetoric is serving us very well. So what Flora and I are hoping on doing is telling you a little bit, not the whole story, but a little bit of the story about how we may have gotten to this point. That is our objective. And I want to start out by telling you about Hugh Onoda, a Japanese soldier who in 1944 was dispatched to the Philippine island of Lubang with a very simple mission. He was to stay there, and if the Allies were to try to retake the island, his job was to harass them, to commit sabotage, and otherwise make their lives as miserable as possible. Hugh Onoda was a dedicated man. He harassed the Allies, right, and later the Philippines, until 1974, right? He blew things up, he killed people, he lived off the land on green bananas, coconuts, and cows that he stole from farmers, killed and butchered himself. Very, very successful man, very dedicated, and he would be very impressive except for the simple fact that the war ended in 1945, right? Which is, of course, why I'm interested in him. Did he not know that the war was over? And the answer is, it's hard to say. Certainly, he had lots of opportunities to find it out, right? After a while, the Philippine authorities realized what was happening, and they started doing things like leaving him leaflets beside cows that he had slaughtered, dropping leaflets out of airplanes telling him that the war was over, leaving current newspapers in areas where he was likely to find them, leaving letters from loved ones pleading with him to stop fighting. None of that worked. The only thing that got him to stop fighting was the Japanese authorities finally looked up his former commanding officer, who in 1944 had been an army major, but who in 1974 was an elderly bookseller. They shipped him off to Lubang. He talked face to face with Onoda and persuaded him that the war was over. Nothing else would do it. So this is the interesting thing. Why didn't Onoda realize the war was over? And the answer is, everything he saw that contradicted the view that the war was still on, he dismissed as enemy propaganda. Right? He had an idea, evidence that supported that idea, he believed, evidence that contradicted that idea, he dismissed. The main premise of today's talk is that there's a little bit of Hugh Onoda in all of us.
Many years ago, a group of researchers asked a number of people about their opinions on capital punishment. Most of them already had some sort of opinion, either for or against. The researchers then gave these people a mixture of articles, some of which portrayed capital punishment as a good idea, and others that did the opposite. The funny thing about exposing people to this mixture of information was that it didn't help them understand each other better, nor did it help them to moderate their views. Instead, people's opinions on capital punishment became more extreme. Those who supported capital punishment before reading the articles supported it more strongly afterwards, and those who opposed it before now opposed it even more strongly. The problem appears to have been that these people were processing the new information selectively. When they read an article that supported their own point of view, they read it enthusiastically, feeling good about how their point of view was being vindicated. But when they got to an article that contradicted their point of view, suddenly their critical thinking skills kicked in, and they were very alert to the methodological flaws and weaknesses in the arguments. So when they were asked again about their opinions on capital punishment, they remembered reading very good, strong information supporting their point of view, and very weak, lame, defective information contradicting it. The result was that their opinions became stronger, not more balanced. For the past year and a half, the two of us have been working on developing a brand new kind of critical thinking course, and this is one of the biggest problems that we face. Nobody has the time or the energy to think critically about every piece of information that they encounter. So no matter how well trained we are, we have to apply our critical thinking skills selectively. It will always be more emotionally satisfying to think critically about ideas that we don't like than about ideas that we do like. The result is that even the best trained of us tend to use our critical thinking skills to reinforce our own biases instead of to combat them. This is a big part of what we call confirmation bias, which is a selective processing of information in ways that supports our pre-existing beliefs. A large study from the United States a few years ago illustrates this point. You probably all know that in the States, the best predictor of whether an individual believes that human activities are altering the climate is not their knowledge of the science, but their political opinion. If an American is politically left-wing, they're likely to believe that human activities are changing the climate. If an American is politically right-wing, they do not. This has frustrated scientists for many years, and they have been known to complain that Republicans are simply ignorant of science. However, this does not appear to be what is happening. If you measure how much people know about science, and also measure where they fall on a left-right continuum, you will find that the more a right-wing oriented individual knows about science, the less likely they are to believe that human activities are changing the climate. In other words, they are not using their knowledge to form an unbiased understanding of the world, they're using it to support a belief that they already hold for non-scientific reasons. Please note that we do not intend to pick on people on the political right. We have evidence to suggest that people of all political orientations are subject to the same biases.
So that brings us to our second major topic in our title, naive realism. So I think confirmation bias is pretty horrible, right? It means that most of us, most of the time, are actively supporting our own prejudices and seldom calling them into question. But even worse than the fact that we tend to reinforce our own prejudices is the fact that we are often unaware that we are in the process of reinforcing our own prejudices. Right? The process of reaffirming our own prejudices is largely invisible to us, with the result that we think it is obvious that we are right. It is obvious that the world is the way that we personally perceive it to be. That is what we call naive realism. And the problem with naive realism, of course, is that if it's obvious that the world is as we perceive it to be, then that means if anybody else perceives the world as being some different way, that person must be misinformed, evil, or stupid. So once we reach that conclusion, we say, okay, let's just see if the problem is misinformation. So we then stand up in a rather loud and condescending voice. We explain the real facts to them. If they don't instantly change their point of view, we go, okay, we've ticked off misinformation. That doesn't seem to be the problem. Okay, we're left with this person's either evil or stupid. And that's where we are. Right? If I think I am obviously right, and I also think that people who disagree with me are evil and or stupid, then rational discussion is no longer possible, right? It's me and the people who agree with me against the bad guys. This, of course, is a situation we are seeing in political theaters all over the world. In some countries, maybe worse than others. Canada is, I think, currently doing better than certain close neighbors of ours, but we do, in the long run, tend to copy a lot of trends coming from the other place. So I don't think we should get too smug yet. So Flora and I have been concerned about this issue for about a year and a half. And our solution to the problem has been to try to create a special sort of critical thinking course, one that focused specifically on cognitive biases such as confirmation bias and naive realism. If you ever take the course, you'll find out there are several dozen more, but we'll stick with those two for now. The many, many different biases, they seem to have many different psychological roots. They create many different specific consequences. The good news is they can all be combated with roughly the same set of techniques, right? A huge part of combating these sorts of biases is just getting together with people who have points of view very different from one's own, discussing these issues with them, and trying to take those people's points of view seriously. This is, of course, a procedure we try to model in the class. So the catch is it doesn't always work in the class. And there are a couple of reasons it might not work in the class, right? One, you can probably guess. When you dispute people's most cherished beliefs, they sometimes get pretty defensive, right? And it only takes one party in a pair to get really defensive for all hope of effective dialogue being short-circuited. I thought that happened relatively seldom in our class. The bigger problem in our class was a different one, which is even though there's 20 some odd people in the room, you very often found that everybody was pretty much on the same side of a lot of controversial issues, right? This is a problem called homophily. That is, people tend to hang out with other people who are similar to themselves, right? Which I think the reason for that is fairly obvious, right? It's a lot more comfortable, it's a lot more easy to communicate with people who are similar to oneself than it is to communicate with people who are very different from oneself, right? Most of us enjoy conversing, but we mostly enjoy conversing with people who are at least somewhat like-minded. So for those situations where, for one reason or another, we cannot get diverse points of view in the room, the second best procedure to try to de-confirmation bias oneself is to come up with those alternative points of view oneself, right? If I firmly believe X, but I know that some people believe Y, and I can't actually find any of those people who believe Y who will actually talk to me in a non-defensive manner, okay, I'm just going to have to imagine I'm having a conversation with that person. What arguments would they raise? If I can only think of bogus arguments, I probably haven't tried hard enough. Let's go on the internet and find the best arguments I possibly can in favor of proposition Y. So that is the second line of defense, right? To try to be a genuinely open-minded person who is not constantly in the clutches of confirmation bias. And the hope, of course, is that if we can encourage enough people to short-circuit their confirmation biases, to look at other points of view with open minds, then we may be able to achieve some sort of positive change. I know that the theme of this conference is revolution. We have heard the talk of the Lithuanian Revolution at the beginning of this series. It's quite lovely. We do, when we think of revolution, typically think of revolutions such as the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, where there was blood running in the streets and where the most dogmatic and most prone to confirmation bias individuals typically ran the show once the revolution was over. So I think we're not big advocates for revolution, though we are big advocates of positive progressive change. We just think that that progressive change should take place gradually, and that as much as possible we should try to have enough of a discussion of the progressive changes we want to implement so that everybody's on board. It seems to us that the best way to achieve us, at least the best way that individuals can try to work towards that goal, is to be open-minded, open to other people, to be humble, right? To recognize that no matter how much you know, you never know everything. There is always a possibility of new information coming in. And to be willing to look at new ideas wherever they come from. If enough people can cultivate that openness, then I believe that evolutionary change is a serious option for us. Thank you.